Thank you, Andrew. Right. I'm assuming a certain amount of prior knowledge about what I'm talking about, but I'll just quickly, briefly summarize. I propose that the solar system started as a binary star system with a large star, maybe 10 solar masses. It blew up relatively quickly into a supernova explosion, and that this occurred 4.6 billion years ago. So I'm not challenging any basic dates about when the solar system formed. I'm just saying how it formed. And in fact, it was Fred Hoyle who proposed this in the first place. It wasn't me. But his view was that, yes, thered been this big supernova explosion that explained a lot of the high atomic number materials on the planets. But he assumed that the star core had been just blown away during the explosion and never to be seen again. So that the only thing left was left in our vicinity, the galaxy was, material that formed the planets without the star core. I'm saying the star core was still in orbit. It was blown away from the center of the binary, but it's now in a long comet-like orbit. And it's actually approximately perpendicular to the plane of the ecliptic. So it can whiz in and out of the central part of the solar system without completely disrupting the planets. And I've actually done a little bit of modeling on that using this universe sandbox. Okay, this talk is about what this type of regular perturbation of the planet has done to us as human beings, and also has clearly affected the climate. And I mean, it's more than, the changing dramatic alterations to the planet's orientation in space, its rotation axis, its orbit have affected the climate, and the climate has affected us as human beings. Okay. So the first thing I want to say is I'm mentioning this sort of asymmetric type 2 core collapse supernova explosion. Is that a complete fantasy, or does it really happen? And in fact, there's a paper published this month in MNRAS, and it shows that there is a star which has been blown out of a binary star system. And in fact, this picture is showing the bow shock. So this star is moving very fast relative to its local environment. In fact, pulsar went off in the other direction. It's not precise, it's sort of tangential trajectories. You can read the paper about it. But the basic idea is that it is possible for binary stars to blow up in an asymmetric way, then to kick out one of the partners, or maybe it remains captured, maybe it flies off altogether. Now, I'm going to move relatively rapidly because I've got about 80 slides, which means I'm going to give about 1 minute to each slide. So if you want to really look at some things I've written here, you might want to go back and look at the PowerPoint after the talk. So what I'm saying here is, okay, we're going to start talking about climate and human beings, and we're going to put some sort of scale on this, parameters. So modern humans, as we sort of generally recognize them as the people who might want to meet on the metro, have been around about 300,000 years. And the important recent discoveries are that when we start to analyze ancient DNA and DNA of current populations, we can see that first, most important information is that we're all pretty closely related to chimpanzees and bonobos. It's about 99% approximately, but there have been interbreeding events between subspecies of human beings. And what was demonstrated over the last 20 years is that Europeans are about 2% Neanderthal, and Africans have no Neanderthal DNA. And then more recently, this Denisovian hominid was discovered in the Altai Mountains, in a cave in the Altai Mountains in Russia, in Siberia. And it was then found that, in fact, Denisovian DNA turns up a lot in the Chinese and Indonesians. So it looks like some of the speciation has been due to these type of recombination events. And in addition to that, the more we analyze the DNA, we realize there was another so far unidentified hominid involved in this process, which I'm calling Homo Who in red. It looks like this is quite an early interaction. It seems from like maybe going back 2 million years. And we're not entirely sure what this additional member looks like. But the key point is it's called super archaic DNA that appears in the human genomes around the world. Okay. Now I'm going to move on to climate. What is important here is to see that there are these peaks. This is the ice core from one of the ice cores from Antarctica, and you can see these clear peaks in the heating peaks, basically, in and temperature jumps every 120,000 years. And between the big peaks, there are these oscillations more or less every 4,000 years. And we are here. So we're sort of due for another downturn in temperature rather than global warming, which is what we're so concerned about. And so basically what I'm saying, there seems to be an astronomical driver, which there's a 120,000 year cycle and a 4,000 year smaller cycle. You can see this on a much more fine scale if you look at the data from the ice cores. And in fact, it's really important to go and look at the original data because there's so much manipulation of the data now and how it's presented. You really don't know what you're looking at. Anyway, this is CO2 data from the Dome Sea core, and you can see there have been these rising CO2 levels and actually some declines in CO2 as there's been this dramatic changes of climate. And these explosion markers are basically saying this is when the catastrophes or cataclysms, climate cataclysms occurred. And again, looking at other markers, like if you look at nitrogen-15, which tends to be it's a heavy isotope of nitrogen, it's associated with supernova material, and we get spikes of that. And I'm sorry if, that's what I'm saying about my slides, there's a huge amount of information probably hiding behind your faces unless you shrink your screens. And this is also clear with snow accumulation, which is the other chart below that. Now, what I'm saying is that, these close flybys, which are probably between 5 and 10 Earth-Moon distances, really have quite a dramatic effect. They go through very fast. It's coming from ecliptic north to ecliptic south, and it gets close to us, and it sort of knocks our planet around. And I'm proposing that there have been a number of quite precisely different polar locations. So, for example, more than 12,000 years ago, the North Pole was located in Hudson Bay. And then in that period between 12,000 and 8,000 years ago, it's actually located in Spitsbergen. Now, to see in the data exactly where a pole is very difficult. But huge amounts of work has gone into looking at climate change. And when you look around the world, you can see evidence of equatorial forests moving around. And so this is our current equator crossing Africa. But there's evidence 12,000 years ago, there was tropical forest in Arabia. There's another example of that, again, the same Second World Age pole, equator, where there has been tropical rainforest found in Chile. So much, much further south than the Amazon. And again, the globes on the other side just basically give you a picture of where the poles were and where the equators were. And this isn't just fantasy. This is, there's so much climate history data being churned out in different countries. You can interpret that data quite successfully by saying, okay, what you're looking at is a moving equator and moving tropics, the deserts and the jungles, rather than, otherwise you get very contradictory data between different locations on the planet in a particular era. Okay, but again, you can look into that. So again, just for example, we always think the Amazon rainforest is a very static thing and it's terribly important. We don't chop down trees and it's, a very fragile environment. But the evidence over the last 20,000 years, it's sort of drifted, from north, to quite far south in South America. And in addition, you then get sometimes a sort of savanna-like region appearing in one era, and then, later you're getting earlier, you're getting, tropics to savanna switching. Okay? Another feature is if you alter the axial angle, you will alter the angular distribution of the tropics. So that means desert belts, if your axial angle is bigger, then you get lots of seasonality and you get very wide climatic zones. If the axial angle relative to the orbital plane is basically 90 degrees, you don't get any seasons. Okay, so knocking the planet over a bit relative to the orbital plane has a tremendous effect on climate. In addition, we have huge amounts of data because of all this climate change research. I mean, Arabia was an incredibly wet place more than 12,000 years ago, and it had a sort of European temperate climate between 12,000 and 8,000 years ago, and rivers, lakes, trees, forests. Okay? And of course, that then affects the people who live there. This picture is showing what the world looked like 12,000 years ago. So basically, we have an ice cap here. And this is the big thing. We keep talking about ice ages. But if you keep moving the ice cap around, then that's another way to interpret the data of why you're getting a lot of ice erosion or glacial erosion. And if you look around the world at this time, okay, Britain was still part of Europe. It's pre-Brexit. India is bigger because the continental shelf is not flooded. Arabia is actually wet, but the Persian Gulf doesn't exist. But there is a shallow sea in Central Asia. So basically, a sea that covered both the Caspian and the Aral Sea. In China, well, China and Japan are connected. So Japan wasn't an island, it was just the eastern end of Asia. And Indonesia was a continent. So basically, that region flooded and now it's islands. I also want you to think about a rather interesting phenomenon. Okay, our planet is an oblate sphere. So basically, the poles are flattened and the equator is flat. So if you suddenly change the orientation of the planet, you move the pole, then you're going to get some quite dramatic sea level changes. In fact, the difference between the polar diameter and the equatorial diameter is about 42 kilometers. So the potential for sea level change is about 21 kilometers if you just shift the pole. So what I'm saying is that you can explain these stories of Atlantis in the middle of the Atlantic, and there are also, Pacific Ocean stories where there's a lot more land around Easter Island by saying, in fact, you shift the pole, then you'll actually get drowning or elevation of land relative to local sea level. There are specific examples of this. Okay, this is the IPCC data where they try and smooth everything out into a nice, sea level rise curve, but the data fits steps quite well. And when you look at specific examples, you find there isn't much evidence of slow sea level change. It's very sudden. And so this example is this is near Durban. It's off the southeastern side of Africa. And what you get is a very defined shoreline down at 100 meters, and then another one around about 50 meters. Okay, these lines here, right? Now, what that's telling you is that the shoreline or the coast has been pretty stable for quite a long time, and there's been a lot of erosion, and you can see that shoreline. If it was constantly moving, then that would all get wiped out. You wouldn't see it. And there's another example here, which is more recently in the Black Sea, where you can see sudden drowning of about 2 meters of water in the Black Sea. So villages that were on the waterfront suddenly are underwater. I put this picture in because it's a nice picture. Amazing visual image, which is this diver swimming in fresh water, and below him, in fact, is salt water, which is saturated with hydrogen sulfide, and it gives this refractive index change. So it looks like he's flying, but in fact, this is in the Yucatan Peninsula. And again, another way to look at these sea level changes, to look at these drainage systems. They're called karst systems, where rainwater erodes the limestone, and so you get these underground rivers. And so, of course, the lower the sea level, then the deeper the river tunnels go. Okay, so now that's a sort of background to our changing climate, rather perturbed planet. So now I'm going to get on to how old is history, right? Because the general consensus is it's about 5,000 years. You think about Egypt, most people think, okay, it's sort of starting around about 3000 BC. Okay, people would maybe talk about the Sumerians, take it back to 4000 BC, but that's the sort of general bandwidth that people are thinking about. However, if you read Herodotus or Plato or Manetho, by the way, there's no original version of his timetable of history, but so many authors copied him that there's quite a detailed account of what he had to say. But basically, they're all saying history is 20,000 years or more of civilization. There was civilizations 20,000 years ago, not just 5,000 years ago. So first thing is to look at what the mythological stories say. And these are being described by Greeks, Iranians, Indians, Chinese, Aztecs, Maya. There's lots of civilizations that have these stories. Generally, they say they're 5 world ages. If you go and look at the ice cores, you can find, indeed, there have been dramatic events, climate change events. And this one I've shown here, this core is from Western Antarctica, showing what happened about 20,000 years ago. And there's a very distinct catastrophe band here. And then you can see the climate's quite different. It's quite a dusty environment with the ice, and that's quite a low dust environment because the ice is so transparent. Anyway, so taking you through the ages, the first age is about 17,600 BC, 13,600 BC, that's Pleistocene still. Then the second age, 13,600 BC, 9,600 BC, that's sort of end ice age period. But there's some very funny things going on at that time because the climate in Europe was warm. It wasn't an ice sheet, right? Yes, it was an ice sheet in America, but not in Europe at that time. And then you get this major catastrophe right at the end of the ice age. You get this thing called the Younger Dryas climate change, which is a very sudden cooling of the planet. And now people attribute that to major asteroid impacts. A lot of dust in the atmosphere. You get the fourth age, which is what happened in 5,600 BC was there was a major flood. And this was first established, that date was established in the Black Sea, drilling cores and showing that there was freshwater sediments below saltwater sediments. And more recently, another 4,000, sorry, these are, it's a 4,000 year period. Yeah? So then after the flood at 5,600 BC, you got another catastrophe event around about 1600 BC. And that one, you'll see in my books, I call Cataclysm of Fire, because there's lots of evidence of a conflagration, that there was burning, serious burning. And then finally, with our fifth age is, and the C14 date is really coming from Santorini, which is the island in the Aegean that blew up. But there's correlation with volcanic eruptions and lots of events around the world. Okay, so that's the sort of time frame I'm talking about for the development of human civilization. So the first startling result is that they've now dug up jewelry being made by the Denisovians, which is 65,000 years old. And they've used a lathe. That's a hard stone. It's a hard green stone. You need some type of lathe to make that perfectly circular bangle. Okay? So that's first evidence we have of, these people were more than just banging rocks together. They had more capability than that. When you look at Denisovian DNA, you find these people not only migrated sort of southeast into Asia, into China, Indonesia, these areas, they also were sailing because their genes turn up on the islands of the Pacific. And in fact, if you look at the modern Southeast Asian population, the Melanesians are up to 5% Denisovian. Remember, these people are coming from Central Siberia. In contrast, the Europeans are basically 2.5% Neanderthal and a tiny bit of Denisovian. I'd also like to show you some ancient art. This is incredibly high quality art, very good sense of perspective, almost a photographic representation of animals. Right, this is done at least 33,000 years ago. We know that from doing specific dating for the crust that appears on the outside of these pictures. And again, you can follow that up with the reference. Now we can move on to between 40,000 years ago and 20,000 years ago. I'm saying civilization is kicking off really around about 20,000 years ago. But already by then, we've got evidence they can make ropes. They can do very good three-dimensional sculpture. This sculpture of work. This is made in ivory, mammoth ivory. It was found in France. It's a very good piece of art, clear representation. You got the things you expect: harpoons, hunting spears. They're already making clothes. These are needles. These Siberian, again, this is made of mammoth tusk, but they are showing clothing in this family wearing furs. And even though this is a very lovely, voluptuous woman, the important point about this slide is they had food, lots of it. This wasn't a sort of a poor hunter-gatherer type of environment. They definitely had abundant food And that's the first thing you need if you're going to develop a civilization. So moving to the first stage of civilization, the earliest signal we have is the pottery of what are called the Jomon culture in northern Japan. These people are not Japanese, they are Siberians. And in fact, we now know the Ainu, who are the sort of indigenous people, and the Jomon are absolutely culturally and genetically related. And they were basically making pots 14,000 BC, which is 7,000 years before the Near East was doing pottery. Again, we can see genetically the sort of separation between Europeans and the Ainu happened about 50,000 years ago. So again, we're saying there's an emergence of a sort of intelligent group of people and an emergence of civilization, and there's distinct connections to the DNA. I don't know if you've seen these things before, but there's megalithic structures in Siberia which are totally enigmatic. We don't know how old they are, but the evidence is they are between 12,000 to 15,000 years old. They're very large-scale megaliths. We don't know how these people did this. This, you can get this on Google Earth. It's basically it's a city. It's a square, kilometer by kilometer looking city structure. They're on that map. I'm showing on the far near the Finnish border, there is megalithic structures and walls and stuff like that, and also down in near Lake Baikal, but also now things are being found in the Urals as well, like pyramid-like structures or properly cut stones, buildings. And this is truly fantastic. Okay, some people say, forget it, it's got to be geological. It's just too huge, too amazing. But it's located on the east coast of Brazil, and it's truly big. I mean, if this has been man-made, we don't understand how they did it. All right. Moving on to something that's been more dated. This is Gugang Padang in Java. This is a temple structure built on top of a volcanic plug. The people who seem to have built it look like this, and I'll come back to this. This is an important thing. These are Conehead people, and I'm going to talk about them more at the end of the talk. The dating was done by the Nuclear Energy Authority of Indonesia. They're pretty confident about their dates, and they're saying this thing is 12,000 BC. It's 14,000 years old. All right, that's a very old date. If you look at the culture, it seems to be, again, because I told you the DNA is very Denisovian. This is Denisovian people, and that's where it is. They were cutting stones in quite, difficult ways. I mean, this is basalt, it's very hard. Challenge people to do that now. They were building in these basalt columns, and they were making stairs. They were drilling holes. They're drilling holes in stone. This is all 14,000 years ago. This is quite incredible. Moving on, there's cultural similarity, architectural similarity between Gugang Padang and this place called Nan Modal. This island is absolutely in the Pacific Ocean, right? So whoever was building here somehow managed to get to there, and even if you allow for the fact this was land, this was definitely not land. You had to get a boat to get there and to build this. That's spectacular bit of construction. This has now become quite famous. This is Göbekli Tepe, which is it's in southeastern Turkey. It's well dated. It was, when they did the excavations, a German archaeological team, they were taking good samples, and they definitely got this early date, 12,000 years old. This is what the people look like. I want to draw your attention to these hands clasped across the middle, because it's a sort of motif that pops up again and again. As if these builders actually got around the world quite a lot. Another important thing about this area, it's not just this one temple. The Turkish archaeologists are digging up a lot of villages and towns in this region, okay, and with quite impressive architecture for that era. Okay, so this is now the so-called end of Ice Age extinction. I'm saying maybe it wasn't an ice age, maybe it was just a big pole shift. Here is the moment it happened. This big dip is what we call the Younger Dryas, which is a big freeze. We've now found this very large crater in Greenland under the ice, which that was, people first said, okay, it was that did it, just that, nothing else. But then you get, of course, the famous, herds of mammoths, which were basically buried suddenly. Here is an example of mammoth tusks in Siberia. There's another picture up in the other corner showing, a montane, I think it's, I'm sure it's North Prairie region of North America, and they just found it buried under the fields. But the important thing is these so-called Younger Dryas YD impacts have now been found all over the world. And what's characteristic about them is they are heavy metals. They're not just your typical carbonaceous chondrite or even nickel iron meteorite. There's things like platinum in them. Okay. And you get this phenomena, in fact, at the Permian Triassic boundary as well. In fact, in Devon, you can find meteorites, bits of meteorites, which have thorium and uranium. They're radioactive, these things. In addition, you've got quite good data now for this burnt layer called black mass in America. It's got different names in different areas, but it's showing that there's fires everywhere. Forests were burnt at this time. Then little side chat was quite fun. This is something very strange. Okay, in this destruction layer, they found this aluminium object, which looks like a machine part, okay? But it was actually found together with extinct mastodon bones, right? So again, you can read this slide a bit later, but basically, something was mixed up with all the debris and the extinction debris and the flood debris from this event. So we absolutely don't know what this is. It was found in Romania. We don't have any associated civilization to match it to. Okay. At the same time, various structures were drowned. I've talked about this one before, Yonaguni, which is, again, sorry, because all the pictures you can't see it, but it's off the coast of, it's the very last southernmost island of Japan. It's very close to Taiwan. So something was drowned in about 20 meters of water, it goes down deep. But this one's even more fascinating. This, in fact, is a city, seems like a city, which is drowned off the west coast of Cuba. And if you look on Google Earth, you can see straight lines coming to it on the sea floor. And this is side scan sonar data, which is showing they're very big structures. They are about 150 meters by 150 meters, big thing. In addition, they sent down a remote dive vehicle, and you can see walls, you can see blocks. The blocks are about 2 meters, 1 to 2 meters in size. They also found a strange bit of, looks like metal. Maybe it's gold, because if it's been down there for 12,000 years, it hasn't corroded. It's probably gold. Right, moving on. Now we have got into what's called the third age of civilization, which is between basically 12,000 years ago and 8,000 years ago. And I'm taking us to Easter Island, which everyone knows is a bigger anomaly because there's all these huge statues, but how do you support a population who made all this stuff? And I'm saying, in fact, at the time this stuff was being made, Easter Island was like the easternmost part, a much larger continent, which had been sort of, it emerged from the sea. And I want to show you a few things like these. Again, I say about that class tan thing. Well, that's Göbekli Tepe. This is in Indonesia. This is on Easter Island. That's again Göbekli Tepe. This is again on Easter Island. You've got the same sort of look of the statues. And also when you compare those Moa statues on Easter Island, they're actually very similar to statues in Colombia. So there's a small statue here and a slightly larger statues there. In addition, they were carving on the back of these statues this symbol, this sort of like the winged sun symbol you see in Egypt. And they're so it's like they'd made some observation in the sky, and that's what they're recording. In addition, there are actually these megalithic walls on Easter Island, and they resemble walls you get in some of the oldest structures in Egypt, but they're a bit different from the ones you get in Peru, and actually you get megalithic walls in Italy and Greece as well. So what I'm saying is that looking at the walls, I'll go into a bit later, it's possible this is what I'm calling a third age construction. That is, it's a construction between 12,000 years ago and 8,000 years ago. Whereas these are polygonal, so wavy type blocks tend to be from about 6,000 years ago. Okay. Again, moving on, a lot of this type of megalithic building was going on. This is in Montana. You know, we tend to think of Stonehenge, but it's going on everywhere. Okay, very dramatic structures. Here, this is just incredible. This is Japan. Okay, some geologists say, oh, this has just got to be natural. This can't possibly be carved, but it looks like it's been carved. And there's these sort of objects which are very detailed carving, are very hard stone. You've got to have some technology, and you did it. Again, nobody knows the dates of these objects. These are sundial calendars. They are like a gnomon, and marker stones, which look more primitive. But really, the evidence of the dates of this activities is about between 12,000 and 8,000 years ago. However, when you move to the Near East, it all looks a bit more primitive in that era. So we've got good dates on Jericho, which is 9,000 BC. They were building towers, like solid bastions for a city wall. That's what this is. That's just a diagram that's inside the staircase. But you can see from, again, I'm not sure what you're seeing here because maybe images are covering it, but there's sort of iconography and statues and things like that. Again, in the same period, this is now what's called pre-pottery Neolithic A. Again, in the Fertile Crescent, which is the north bit of Syria, the southeast part of Turkey, you're starting to get these cities being built. But again, you get these anomalies, like there's this bit of obsidian here, which has been lathed. It's very hard to lathe obsidian, okay? But someone's made a bangle out of it. You can see it's a bit of a bangle. But this is generally their sort of tools. They had copper. They've got copper beads there. And the houses were beginning to look like cozy little places to live. Okay? This is an era I mentioned earlier with the climate, that Arabia had a European climate. It previously had this tropical climate. Now, this era, this 4,000 years between 12,000 years ago and 8,000 years ago, it had a European type climate. And there's evidence of farms. This is an ancient river, all now in a barren, very, very dry desert. In Jordan, you're starting again, like in Turkey, you're getting these sort of like small dwellings, but in a city-like structure. They're making very beautiful things in stone. They weren't making them in pottery. And then you get these weird anomalies where, like, this huge stone, someone's cut it like with a lightsaber. I don't know how that was done, but someone did it, and this is from this era, okay? Because this is now deep in the desert. This slide is to show the Sahara in between 12,000 years ago and 8,000 years ago was wet. There were lots of rivers. There was lots of game. It was a very nice place to live. There were definitely megalithic building cultures there. This picture is showing the analysis of the water runoff. So they drilled these cores on the west coast of Africa, and then the chart on the other side is showing their calculation of what the rainfall was like. So you have this spike of really substantial rainfall over the Sahara Desert. I'm sorry, that's when I say spike, it was 4,000 years. Okay, I'm going to move on rather quickly, but okay, again, this is quite famous now, that the walls around the Sphinx enclosure show evidence of severe water erosion. These are runoff, these are water channels where the waters run down there and cut through. And this is a diagram. But we still say, we try and say, okay, pyramids and the Sphinx were built at the same time as about 2,500 BC. But an embarrassing egg was found in an Naquada 1 cemetery, which is definitely 4,500 BC. It shows the pyramids were around at that time, right, which is at least 2,000 years more older than this current idea. And in fact, there's a zigzag little picture of the Nile. It's pretty good. I just pulled this one off again, Google Earth. You can see, basically they've got the wiggles in the right places. Again, so what I'm saying is that the Great Pyramids seem to belong to an earlier culture. I mean, certainly the pyramids, there were later pyramids made by the Egyptians, but they're sort of copying these grand structures and never quite actually copied the technology perfectly. Okay, now we're going to sort of on a high-speed tour of our history. Okay, this is the Black Sea flood. As it's accurately dated. Here's an example of the drill cores. They saw a very clear cut of 5,600 BC. If you go around the Black Sea coast, so southern Ukraine, you can see drowned river valleys. You can find the drowned Bosphorus under the water. Off the north coast of Turkey, you can find dwellings. I mean, these are wooden buildings which were drowned suddenly about 8,000 years ago. This wasn't a local event to the Black Sea because off the coast of what is now Israel, but at that time just generally called Levant or Canaan or whatever you call it, you've got megalithic circles, look like some sort of calendar circle. You've got megalithic walls of buildings. This is, you can see the layout of what was a small fishing town. There's a well that's about 8,000 years old. So very good evidence that, it wasn't, the Black Sea flood wasn't just an event in the Black Sea, it was going on everywhere. And in fact, in the previous discussion, I said this is the time that the UK was separated from Europe, so the English Channel, North Sea all appeared at the same time. This is very interesting. This is a 12-meter long monolith that's broken now because it fell, but it looks like it's some sort of lighthouse or marker for a harbour, which is also now deep underwater between Tunisia and Sicily. And the rock that was used to carve this thing is different from the local bedrock. So there's definitely something there, and now it's deep underwater. In addition, this again is quite famous, this idea that on Malta, there are these weird sort of what are called cart tracks, which are a bit like a sort of a rut railway, okay? But they continue under the water. And then you get out the other side in Sicily and they're there again. So basically like the road, because there used to be land between Malta and Sicily. You can drive all these strange cart tracks. And in fact, they've also found these strange cart tracks on the Azores going down to the water. And the Azores is reputedly the Atlantic location of Atlantis. Okay. Moving on, again, same drowning, 8,000 years ago, 5,600 BC. A city was discovered drowned in the Gulf of Cambay. There are monumental buildings which are about 40 meters, foundations 40 meters and 40 meters. There are residential buildings where the foundation is about 5 to 10 meters. There are other structures you can see on the side scan sonar. And then I popped in this other slide, which is not the same part of India, it's sort of down near Sri Lanka, but you can see very clearly how you got these little islands, but in fact, right below, if you drop the sea level, you've got a huge set of hills, because the visibility is great down near Sri Lanka, whereas the visibility here is not so good. And in fact, even in old charts, they would show ships that will avoid this region, which is where that town was, because you could run aground. Okay, during this post-flood period, which is between 8,000 years ago and 4,000 years ago, you're getting these structures starting to appear. This is Saxo Woman near Cusco, just outside Cusco, in Peru. You get this type of very characteristic construction, these polygonal walls and these knobs. It's a very typical sort of thing. Amazing carving of very hard stones, evidence of saw cuts in stone, knobs again appearing here. Machu Picchu is a bit of a funny one because it's got evidence of much older stuff as well. So it's like it's been used and used again many times, so it could be up to 10,000 years old. Fourth age Malta, again, I'm saying between 8,000 and 4,000 years ago. You're all probably familiar with these Maltese temples. The Hypogeum is this beautifully carved underground temple. And again, they were into voluptuous women. The men seem to be, relatively slim. The women, seem to be well fed. But again, what it's showing you is civilization was good, food was available. Okay. And the other one's important. Again, it's probably now hidden behind your images. But the people who were building this stuff they had distinctly larger heads. They had slightly elongated heads. And that's important because I'm going to show you the same people were in the UK. So when you look in the long barrows, the people who actually were building the astronomical structures on Salisbury Plain also had very similar skulls, the people in Malta. Okay, and this image is just sort of a later idea. They used to bury. I've talked about this before in Sardinia. They have this sort of religious idea that you're born and you go back to the Earth Mother, and so these were sort of like, you know, a dead person would be put in a tomb that was like going back to the Earth Mother's vagina or whatever. That seems to be the concept. And here is a Renaissance version of that. Okay. And we're now going to talk about technology. So again, in this period between 8,000 and 4,000 years ago, they seem to have extremely high quality talents. So we have these very, very accurate, this ability to cut stone in an incredibly precise way. It looks like machines. It's not. You can't do that banging rocks together. You've got drill holes. There's this famous. This is much later because this is Dendera, which is formally dated as sort of late period. But they're showing this thing looks like a light bulb. And some people walk up and there's a light bulb. Or you've got this strange object in the Cairo Museum, which clearly looks like some sort of machine part. All right, so I'm now going to jump into more detail about this globalization. So during this period, 8,000 years to 4,000 years ago, it looks like definitely this sort of technological culture was everywhere. Okay, so the first one I want to draw your attention to is the handbag mystery, right? So in Göbekli Tepe, you've got these things that look like handbags, and they keep popping up. So you get them here. Before I get too deep into this, I think they're probably some badge of authority, but they could be something else. They could be a laptop. Who knows? Anyway, so they pop up in Iran, they pop up in Central Asia. They typically the symbol. There seems to be two groups of people there, what look like fishmen or aquatic people and birdmen, and you get this appearing all the way through to Assyria. So this is Oannes, who's like one of the teachers, who's like someone who's supposed to come from the ocean to teach the arts of civilization. And you also get these so-called bird people. These are the people actually who eventually evolved into the angels that appear in the Bible. So again, I mean, just look at the PowerPoint at your leisure later, but I'm saying these handbags appear all over the world over a 10,000 year period. Okay, so it's a very strange thing. I'd also like to draw attention to megaliths. I mean, we tend to think Stonehenge is big, but these things are enormous. We have Baalbek. This is Baalbek before the stone quarry. This is in Lebanon, sorry, Baalbek, Lebanon. Before the stone quarry was excavated, and after excavation, they found that actually were even more of these things, big, huge stones they were cutting. This is Aswan. Aswan quarries were used right from the beginning of Egyptian civilization, right through to the late period. This incredible quarry here in Yangshan in China, an enormous block of stone they're trying to cut out and move. And again, look at the PowerPoint afterwards, because you can just look. I've actually got quite high resolution pictures. You can just zoom in and see just how big these things are. You can also look at age stratified megalithic walls. So just like a geologist will look at a geological column. So young stuff is above older stuff. Okay? You can do the same thing with these walls, because often they were used and reused. And so here you have like Roman on top of this Cyclopean type of building structure where you have irregular stones but fitted together really perfectly. This one has been quite well dated, because what they did is actually drilled into it and got, you know, marine material and carbon-14 dated it. And it looks like these Cyclopean type walls are between, youngest they're 3000 BC and oldest are about 5000 BC. And again, in Peru, in Cusco, you can see this transition between very high quality to lower quality, and that's Spanish. In Athens, for example, there's this extraordinary wall, which is on a hill. It's not the Acropolis, it's on a hill near the Acropolis, which is absolutely monstrous megalithic stones. Again, this type of linear placing of blocks is quite like the Great Pyramid, and I'm attributing to this period between 8,000 years and 4,000 years ago, whereas, am I talking rubbish here? You know what I'm saying? No, that is between 12,000 and 8,000 years ago, and this is between 8,000 and 4,000 years ago. Okay, so I'm saying this stuff is old, you know, relative to what we think of as human history. The other thing is, again, I'm not sure if you know this, but there are pyramids all over the world. And we tend to think of Egypt. This is China. There are lots of pyramids in China. They were built primarily what's called by the Sai civilizations, where you get this name, the city of Siam. And again, they are old and very big, and they look like Mexican pyramids. This is Mexico. This is a very controversial pyramid in Bosnia, where some people say it's rubbish, but they're constantly excavated to say it's basically built on some sort of concrete material. And also you get these similarities between Maya structures and Cambodian structures. There are even pyramids in the Amazon jungle. And that's what I was saying about the jungle moves around, right? So these are just being picked up on Google Earth, okay? In addition, you can find this stone clamping technology. This is where you get 2 blocks of stone, you get what do you call it, mortise? It's a specific, like in joinery, you have the specific type of angled, these are called mortise. Anyway, these things are filled with an alloy and they hold the stones together. And again, it's a practice you can find everywhere, Ethiopia, Cambodia, Armenia, Sardinia, it's Tiwanaku, it's at Pumapunka in Bolivia. Okay, again, at your leisure, look at the stuff, but it's global. And what I'm saying again, the period this was going on was between like 5000 BC and 2000 BC. Again, you get the thing with polygonal walls I mentioned before. So this is Ollantaytambo, right, which is in Peru. You've got Delphi in Greece looking very similar. In fact, again, these knobs on that Chinese megalithic block. That's it. So what they did, they cut the thing out and then cut underneath it. But how on earth are we going to lift the thing? I mean, they thought they could. You get this knob type construction process. So it looks like in this later period, they had to have some way of putting ropes around the stones, whereas in the early period, they're doing it some other way. And even in the Assyrian in Egypt, you get evidence they're using these knobs and then cutting them off, but you actually get 2 different styles. In fact, in the Assyrian, you get 3 different styles. So you get like a 4th age knob style, but this is 3rd age, where these huge blocks are absolutely perfectly cut geometrically. Again, technology again, tube drilling. We've got lots of evidence. This is not a fantasy. This is for real. Saw cuts of stones. So, this is much higher level than the sort of copper chisel and a rock type of concept that you'll get generally. These are unbelievable. These are tube drills, which are on a grand scale. And you can see the people tube drill core. It's enormous. This is in Sicily, right? There's another one in Afghanistan. Absolutely ridiculously big. So people there, this whole cylindrical structure has been just drilled into the bedrock. How do they do that? No idea, right? But someone knew how to do really large scale engineering. I'll throw this one in because it's an astronomical society. Here's a spaceship. Yep, it was dug up in Lake Van. We don't know how old it is, but it's probably 4,000 years old. I mean, various people have tried to interpret what it is. If it's not a spaceship, what is it, right? And in fact, something looking rather like a rocket is on a petroglyph in Altai Mountains, not far away. No, that's quite far away, sorry, but it's, again, something for amusement. Okay, so now we get to the end of what I'm calling the 4th age, which is basically between 8,000 years and 4,000 years ago. And you get all over the world, there's 2 suns in the sky sort of being recorded. So this is in Afghanistan and Java, and you can see the sun there and sun there. This is in Iraq. This is in Arabia, Southern Arabia is in Yemen, right? In fact, that's probably Venus. That's Starcore, and that's the sun. Here we have it in Persepolis in Persia in Iran. Okay, and we also, the one on the corner, which may be buried for you, is Hittite in Turkey. Okay, so again, big planetary disaster, and a whole bunch of cities got drowned again. All right, so we have Pavlo Petri in southern Greece. You've got a whole town that went under, and it's now, I think, under about 5 meters of water. You've got drowned structures in the Adriatic. They've got a road here, 2 kilometers of metal road. Got villages, and this stuff can be carbon-14 dated quite easily because there's lots of wooden material there. Dwarka, which is to the north of that city I showed you previously. So, 4,000 years earlier, this city here in the Gulf of Cambay was drowned. But then this coastal city called Dwarka was drowned again in 1628 BC. And again, it's quite easy to do the geology on it because it's basically sort of from the low tide line out to about 4 meters deep. So it's quite easy to dive. The visibility is a bit bad, but it's definitely Finally, in our fifth age, another event happened. Again, you've got to read my Cataclysms and Renewals book, but something very strange happened because there was this weird destruction that appeared on structures from the end of the New Age, New Kingdom Egypt period. I don't know if you know, the late Bronze Age, it was a thriving time, and suddenly bang, everything was wiped out. In Cyprus, I've got a flat in Cyprus, and around the corner from me, there was a whole city, which was boom, wiped out. All along the coast of the Levant, all the ports were wiped out. And the thing is, what you got is this weird radiation damage on these stones from Tanis in the Nile Delta. And you get it here on these colossi. Something dramatically bad happened. And it's described, well, destruction of Venus is described in various mythological terms, but it seems that this has really happened. Right. At the beginning of the talk, how am I doing? I'm running out of time, aren't I? Okay. At the beginning of the talk, I talked about this Homo who. What are they? Aquatic apes. I'm going to blast through this rather quickly because I don't want to take up your time too much. But basically, in about 1960, a marine biologist said, a lot of our features sort of would work rather well as a beach-dwelling organism, beach-dwelling hominid. So if you want to stand up, it's quite a good thing if you're wading, looking for crabs and fish and stuff like that. If you are a hominid that tends to hang out on the beach, then having your hair on your head protects you from UV, but you don't want hair anywhere else because you want to swim. But you do need fat because you need to stay warm in water. We also have what's called a descended larynx, which actually prevents us from drowning if we get underwater, so watering the lungs. And finally, because we've done some molecular genetics, we know that there's a gene that actually comes from Denisovians, which helps you hold your breath. Right? It's very common in Tibetans, but it's also quite beneficial if you're diving. Now, meet the fish people, or whatever you want to call them, the aquatic coneheads. So these people suddenly appear after 5,000, that flood 8,000 years ago, and they appear everywhere. So this is Yamunkian are in Canaan, and so it's now Israel. You can look at this elongated heads, these slit eyes, very sort of plump-looking people. Al-Ubaid, these you find, well, they're originally discovered down near the Persian Gulf, near. Okay, but it's in the southern end of Iraq, but you can see the characteristics again: elongated heads, these type eyes, big shoulders, good for swimming, and these ones on the right-hand side are from Serbia. In fact, they're on the Danube, so they're completely different cultures, seeing similar types of people. And these people introduced pottery to the Near East. So if you go to Tel Halaf, which is an archaeological site in the Syrian-Turkish border, you can't go there now, it's a bit nasty war zone. Again, these strange conehead people turn up again, all right? And you can see high-quality pottery suddenly appears on the side. In Assyrian and Babylonian mythology and art, they show these fish people, right? They even show the Stark or the Deluge, and these fish people taught them the arts of civilization. I absolutely love this picture. This is from Cyprus. It's like a conehead convention, but they're normal people there. That's normal. They're normal. That's normal. There's these people coneheads. It's like there are two quite different populations of people, and so these are normals, and then unfortunately you may find it's hidden on your screen, but I've cut out the coneheads. They were the gods in the Levant, and this is for both the Phoenicians and all of the Byblos, all the coastal cities worshipped these people, where all have these coneheads. This is Baal, and you see these again, different cultures showing the same types of look. And that's also in Turkey, with the Hittites have the same coneheads. The conehead elite were in Egypt. People tend to say, "Oh, it's the white crown, the red crown of Egypt," and they didn't actually think maybe they've got a conehead under there. And they do. There's one guy without his crown, and he's got a conehead, right? And there's one, So these crowns were actually made because they physiologically had an unusual skull, right? And there's one of them when he's got his head off, showing all. And these are quite late, actually. That's Nefertiti, and these are some of the daughters. And you can find these sculptures in the Berlin Museum, Berlin Archaeological Museum, I think it's called. Okay, they're in India as well. Look at this cone head guy here. That's normal. They appear in the pottery. In fact, this culture emerged 8,000 years ago and then was wiped out 4,000 years ago in the cataclysm of fire. They had boats, and they had seagoing boats and river boats, high quality pottery. They had like four-wheeled vehicles. Okay, that's just a toy, but clearly they had that. They built cities out of brick, they had drainage, they had toilets, indoor baths. You know, there was high quality civilization. These same conehead people appear in India. This is Krishna, this is Shiva. They appear in China. These wisdom gods with these elongated heads, they appear in Japan. Now, they're not just sculptures, they're real skulls of these people, right? So this comes from an archaeological site in China. It's about 8,000 years ago. But 2,000 years on, they had less pronounced skulls, and which sort of suggests these are people, there's inbreeding between different populations. And so this very elongated skull starts to sort of breed out of the population. But there is evidence these people arriving, you know, on the coast of the Mediterranean and Black Sea, and also along the coast of China and Siberia. And you can see, again, I'm sorry, this guy's probably buried under your pictures, but there's a Chinese elongated head wisdom god alongside the Yamarkian sort of cone-headed person, and they look remarkably similar. And also that thing, the eyes they were trying to represent were basically the Chinese, Japanese style of eye when they're doing it in their Near Eastern sculptures. Okay, this is Akram in the middle of Russia. It's supposed to be an ancient astronomical observatory, a bit like Stonehenge. Again, conehead people. When they start digging up the graves, the coneheads are doing it. Okay. The coneheads are also in southern Russia, right? And they're building these megalithic structures. Here's some conehead skulls from Stavropol. Okay. They're building pyramids in the forest. I mean, these are small pyramids. Okay. Again, they've got calendar circles. This is a pyramid base in Kazakhstan. They appear in Europe. And so Hungarians, you find these all over Europe. So as the waves, particularly people coming in after the Roman Empire, you find these people probably in Siberia and migrated into Europe, Western Europe, and into the Roman Empire. And so you get examples of them from that era. So here we're saying like 600 AD, so it's into Roman Empire time. You also get them in the Olmecs. The Olmecs are the people, they were the earlier civilization in the Yucatan Peninsula and Mexico. Again, it's quite clear they all have this general elongated head shape. And even the Maya, which is a later period, so between 500 BC to 900 AD, also had elongated heads. I like throwing this one in. Again, there's, you know, anomalous technology. You know, these are golden, maybe jets, planes, who knows, but they fly. You know, some German flight engineers thought this is so amazing. We'll build models, see if we can make them fly. They fly. The history of these, they were looted in 1890, certainly long before there was any jet aviation, right? And yet, and no one knows how old they are, but they probably come from a period maybe 3,000 or 4,000 years ago, but were looted, so we don't have dating. They also have unusual, they're now, it's not actually, it's gold, silver plus others, gold, silver, copper primarily, the alloy. It's a specific alloy. Okay, this gets good as well. This is Mexico. Again, you've got elongated heads, you've got fish people or fishermen, elongated heads. Again, you've got those slitty eye things, so it looks like, you know, again, it's that they're trying to depict the Chinese look. I love this. These could be fake, but they're really funny. These are what look like flying saucers, okay? Or maybe that's he's riding some sort of torpedo-like device. Or what is this? Looks like a, you know, space bus or something. I don't know what it is. But the people who hold these artifacts claim they are archaeological. They are real. They dug them up. They're in a private collection. You can search them on the internet. And they seem to be with material which would be Olmec, okay, which means it's a 3,000 years at least. Finally, there are real skulls in Peru, and they've been modeled to show what the person would have looked like. This is a girl. That's what she would have looked like. Because these are Peruvian mummies, they've still got the hair, they've got the DNA. And when they do the DNA analysis, they find these people are European. Right, so they're 3,000 years old and they're European. So that means the people got South America, you know, way before the Columbus sort of European period. Okay. Finally, just thought things. You look at one of these elongated skulls from Peru and look at it as a seal. It's sort of structurally quite similar. If you're a baby floating on water and you've got one of those skulls, it's going to help you float. So maybe this was an adaptation designed to help babies born in water stay alive by floating. If you want to swim, you know, we make cycling helmets like this shape because it's aerodynamically very efficient. It works in water too. And you may not know this, but 1 in 2,000 Europeans have webbed feet, right? So this is, you know, I'm saying that the Homo who are basically another group of aquatic apes that stayed more aquatic than the rest of us. You know, we went off and wandered around back on the land. They carried on by the beach. Okay, final point brings us right up to date. Why are we so interested in all this DNA? You may not know this, but Neanderthal DNA confers COVID-19 risk. If you've got Neanderthal DNA, you are more likely to get serious disease. And here's very tight data showing it's this particular region on chromosome 3. We've identified this haplogroup as Neanderthals, 50,000 years old. And what it contains is genes. There's one gene which is involved in the cilia, the epithelia of your lungs. You know, little wavy hairs that make things move around on the surface of your lungs. And they've got these other things called pattern recognition receptors. And I think what's happened is that the Neanderthals had parasites, and these particular pattern recognition receptors are very good for fighting parasitic infections. But unfortunately, the virus, you know, SARS-2 triggers them. And what's interesting is you get these, this is the distribution of this Neanderthal DNA. And see, the big mystery was when people started saying, okay, you know, some of the mixed race people in the UK or in Europe were at higher risk of getting COVID-19. They're all expecting like, wow, there's going to be a big problem in Africa. There's no problem in Africa, right? The reason there's no problem in Africa is because there's no Neanderthal DNA in Africa, in among native Africans. And you get this reasonably good correlation. And also even with China. I mean, China's basically got over its problem much faster than we have in Europe. And again, it's because they have low frequency of Neanderthal DNA. They have more Denisovian DNA. Right? So, by the way, I'm doing this stuff. I'm in this field, so I do know what I'm talking about. Okay, so final. I've written 2 books. I'm far too busy to write my 3rd book at the moment, but it's sort of work in progress. And if you like the ideas, there are YouTube channels where I put up 12 channels here, where these are people who are very diligently digging up interesting stuff about ancient civilization. Okay, so there you go. Voila. Food for thought.
Great, Rupert, thank you very much for that.